Welcome to What Kind of Asian Are You? A podcast featuring conversations about being Asian. We are going to highlight, amplify, and validate Asian voices through deep conversations with those in the diaspora making a difference and being their best selves. I'm your host, Kyle. Welcome to What Kind of Asian Are You podcast. This is a new thing we're doing. It's called Podcast Spotlight, which is a whole entire episode that we will be doing once a month at least, where we talk to another podcaster of an Asian Pacific podcast, or the podcast revolves around Asian themes or about Asian diaspora. The ones that I think you would like if you like us. And I'm very excited to do this just because I think we need to support one another and talk to each other and help each other grow. And I hope that doing this will allow the podcasters that I'm highlighting to grow their podcasts, and also for us to kind of connect and build a relationship. And today's episode, the pilot episode, I brought in Raymond Luu of Real Asian Podcast. I wanted to talk to him for a very long time because I find what he does incredible and really appreciate the podcast he is putting out with his other co-hosts as well. And just a little bit about the Real Asian Podcast. Real Asian Podcast is a podcast or a show focused on Asian and Asian American films where we examine the themes and cultural impact of the movie. It's a really good one if you want to hear Asians talk about Asian movies and media in a nuanced way. And it's a fun listen, and I hope you enjoy our conversation here. All right, and today we have a very special guest, and I'm going to bring him on. And he is Raymond Luu of Real Asian Podcast. How are you doing today, Raymond?
How you doing, Kyle? I'm doing wonderful, fantastic, and jubilant. I wonder if
Oh,
anyone's ever been jubilant to be on your show. That's all right. I'm the first one to say jubilant.
you're bringing out the great adjectives, and I'm happy that you're feeling that way. And I hope
Yeah.
the rest of the conversation will allow you to feel jubilant afterwards as well. And
Yes.
it's been a long time coming because I became aware of you and what you do and all that fun stuff. And then we actually had like our own kind of conversations a little while back, and it was really great. And I knew already then that I want to have you on to share your story and what you're all about. And now it's season 4 of our podcast here, and finally have you here. So it's an honor. And for the listeners that who don't know you and what you do, can you just let them know who you are, what you're about, and most importantly, what kind of Asian are you?
All right. Gotcha. Who I am, what I'm about, and what kind of Asian am I? Just want to make sure I answer all the questions properly in this exam. Okay. Just kidding. Hi everyone. I'm Raymond Luu, as Kyle so skillfully introduced. I'm part of Real Asian Podcast. So I'm the producer of the show, and I work very gratefully with 4 other co-hosts and a couple of guests that have come on the show. I just want to give a quick shout out to Baldwin, Alan, Praga, and Renee and Saba. By the way, I know you heard about my show, but I just wanted to quickly say I definitely heard about your show because you actually did an episode with Renee um, way before us and way before, and I listened to that episode too. So it was really great that you I loved and enjoyed the conversation that you guys had. So that was when I first definitely heard about it, and then also been following your journey. So it's great to see that still going on. Both of us are still going on strong. So that's great. Uh, okay, so about me, I'm a Bay Area native. Grew up, born and raised in primarily South Bay. If anyone, all the listeners out there know where Milpitas is, I'm very impressed because most people don't know where Milpitas is. It's this tiny little town. It used to be a tiny little town. Actually, it's since developed into a kind of a pretty busy city. But currently today, I live in Oakland. Much of my close family members and friends are still around. So family traditions, culture, and having like an inner circle for me is a super valuable trait of mine. It's something that I value very much deeply. Also, the recently producer for Hate is a Virus. We're working on this podcast that's still very much in develop now, so I'm helping them with that. And that I'm helping with producing a mini podcast with another organization called AAPI Force EF. Lots of producing. And lastly, I recently just got a new job, so but hopefully, by the time by the time this episode comes out, hopefully I've had already told my employer that I'm leaving them, but I just recently got a new job, like as of right before this recording. So it'd be funny listening back on it. Like the phone call I had is I just got a job offer. So super excited about that. Lastly, what kind of Asian am I? Man, I knew this question was coming, and I just had long walks outside my house and beach and whatever the case you want to call it, just kind of thinking existentially, what kind of Asia am I? Well, I'll do it. I'll do ethnically. I'm half Chinese, half Vietnamese, first generation born American. The type of a kind of Asian I am, I guess, if you will, I'm the type of Asian who loves all Asian people and things, but also everybody. I don't know if that's probably the lamest answer you've ever gotten, but that's the kind of Asian am I. I'm a half glass full kind of Asian. How about that?
That's perfect. I don't think that's lame at all. I think that's a great answer. And you already talked about a lot that go who you are, and you are a busy Asian. That's what I'm gonna say as
There you
well. A
go.
very
Yeah,
busy Asian doing so
that's a
many things,
more appropriate way of putting
especially
it.
yeah, especially podcast stuff that I'm very impressed by and I want to talk to you a lot about. But I want to just touch on the fact that you mentioned like your explanation of what kind of Asian are you quite like. Why would you say that? I think it's not that lame at all. Why do you feel like you had to preface like, oh, it's probably the lamest you hear from your guests? Like why do you feel that way?
It's a cultural thing a little bit too. I feel many Asians feel there's a certain inherent shame that sometimes we have to we shake off much more efficiently when we get older and have this more internal dialogue with ourselves saying I should be proud of what I do, and regardless of what my parents might say or what society might say, I should be proud of what I do. I say that I say that as lame just because in a jokingly self-deprecating kind of way, and that's kind of my sense of humor. But yes, I mean there are definitely some underlying cultural stuff that kind of comes along with it. I mean, I think with a lot of comedians or actors or whoever people who tend to put themselves out there, it's kind of like a balance check, a balance, a check balance that you put on yourself to be like, oh, it's just kind of like I don't want to make it seem like I'm so narcissistic in a way, so let me go the other way. That's the most heady answer that I can give it in terms of why I say that. But you're right though, there's always sometimes it's not truly lame, and I don't truly think I'm lame. I just fun sometimes it's like that type of humor where it's like self-deprecating.
Gotcha, and that's fine. But just because you feel that way or know how you put it out there, I'm still gonna give you a lot more compliments because I know that's probably get
Thank
on
you.
your nerves too, being the
Yeah.
cultural thing. Eh, Because I think at least I've been following what you do, who you are as a person for a bit now. I think since I kind of really started getting really heavy into doing my own podcast and also following other like-minded podcasts, you're really out there doing a lot of different things related to podcasting in the Asian kind of media landscape, as well as a lot of activism stuff that I think is really incredible. And you should get your flowers for it. And I think you're
Thank you.
doing great work. And
Appreciate that, man.
yeah, and like you mentioned, I interviewed one of your co-hosts for your podcast, Renee. So definitely people should check that episode out as well. She's
Yes, go
great,
check it out. Yep.
awesome, yeah. And I just have wanted to point that out, and then more about you. So you mentioned like your background and what you do, and I'm just really impressed by kind of like the amount of stuff that you do relating to kind of producing AAPI content or just podcasts as a whole. So, can you just talk about how you got into that in the first place before we get into your main podcast and what that all is about?
Oh yeah. Producing in general, I kind of look at it, whatever it is that you do, product, service, content, whatever the case may be, you can call yourself a producer. Obviously, the formal title of a producer tends to be reserved for, entertainment industry, kind of putting this whole production together. I'm not trying to flatten the definition, but definitely I want to respect that. Now, in terms of producing stuff, my background prior to getting into podcasting or just being more involved in content producing is more of an operations background. So I went to school with a business management degree and then worked in other companies and organizations kind of like a very traditional office environment. And I've always had somewhat of a mindset or mentality or approach towards operations, just seeing how things work in the on the inside of things, whatever processes, soft or soft processes, whatever the case may be. I've always just kind of had an inkling or inclination to see how, how do I get to the end goal and the objective, and breaking up the tiny little steps. And then I basically took that type of mentality and put it in the context of something more creative. And I realize now today that my family has always had some kind of creativity amongst them. So my oldest cousin, he was a singer, and he was a singer in a band. His brother is also a singer in a band. My sister is a writer and producer for television currently, but she's always been a proficient writer growing up. She's written like poems and stuff like that. My cousin, the one that like almost I think 90% of the pictures that on my Instagram, my nature pictures, if you will, he's a photographer, a professional photographer. So he obviously has a lot of creativity in that sense as well. And he's actually Alan. Alan is also another co-host for the podcast. So he does a podcast with me, but he's also an amazing photographer. Go check him out. I don't know his Instagram handle off the bat. Sorry, Alan. But so there's always been a creativity gene, if you will, amongst my family. I think my uncle is a singer as well. And I think I don't know why, but I probably didn't fully realize it or lean into it growing up, going to college. I think there was a sense of, well, I might as well do something that's a little bit more stable, more conventional in terms of like an office job, like a salary, a nice salary, and that's how I will live my life. Little did I know, though, as I grew older and started to hang, and anytime I got a chance to speak with other creatives, I just be, became so focused and infatuated with their process, again kind of going back to that operations mindset, but then also understanding like the core impetus of why they're on their creative journey. It could be an artist, or a drawer, singer, someone who plays a musician, whatever the case may be. I'm always so super interested. And then I love movies. I think a little bit of that is because I love watching movies. I love the escapism aspect of it. I love the allegory, the parable aspect of it, how it relates to society and our real lives, and then how we see ourselves and sometimes in the characters, and also sometimes how we don't see ourselves in the characters. Movies can also be a teaching tool, and I think I took all of that, mixed it all in one pot, and ultimately came to the realization of I like to talk a lot, and and also podcasting is probably like, as you know, this is probably like the lowest barrier to entry. It's like you, you can get into like television and film, but you have to get into like videography and editing and all that stuff. And I'm like, let me just go podcasting, so you can just worry about audio. Although you do video too, so you're probably have a much more bigger task than I do. But yeah, that's kind of ultimately how I ended up with producing and taking that all the stuff that I learned, and working with other organizations and teams. It always starts with like a pitch or of a story of something, and me just saying, okay, why? Let's just bring that in front of people, and how do we kind of make that happen? I'm still very, very, very young in the journey, though. I'm self-taught. I didn't go to any producing or media school. Everything I learned is YouTube and Google. University of YouTube and College of Google are the two institutions that I go to learn all the stuff about producing and podcasting.
Well, even without like any major institution, you are killing it. Like, I mean, the stuff that you do with Real Asian Podcast and like all the other stuff I see you put out, it's been great. And I really think, again, you're selling yourself short. You deserve all the flowers you can get for what you do. Because I think the podcast you're doing with your co-hosts, it's great. Because I think we really need these kind of podcasts, and just people talking about movies, especially Asian movie that holds a lot of significance to the whole landscape of entertainment, not just
Hmm.
for like Asians, but worldwide. And
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you mentioned a lot about like the creativity that you and your family have that you kind of then tap into until recently with podcasting? Why do you think that is? Or is it really something that you just never thought about, or were you always kind of just doing other things that not that creative in your mind?
I think it was just something that I never accepted or was ready to accept because I was so focused on, again, that like stable job. I was temping at Google for a little bit, and after that, currently work at San Jose State. Even before that, I was kind of working at this startup company. Um, I think over time, I just kind of got to a place where it's like, you know what? I'm not really finding fulfillment in my job, which is such a millennial thing to say, by the way. But then I said, okay, I think I'm ready to perhaps jump into something that I will enjoy and a passion of mine. Podcasting specifically, I mean, I've listened to podcasts way back in the day. Like I knew what podcasting was. It wasn't like a brand new thing to me. But I think when I for me it was like recording 3 episodes, and this is why I usually tell new podcasters too, is I recorded 3 episodes. I gave myself a 3 episode threshold to say, let me just go through end to end process of 3 episodes, put it out there. And if at the end of that process, if at the end of the third episode, I still feel like I want to keep going, that's a good sign. That means like this is something I want to do. If I don't, because you put something out and you're like, oh man, you know how much work it is. If you go through all that work, that process, and you're already kind of like, I can barely get a fourth episode, I can't imagine doing 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then to me, I usually tell people, then maybe it's not really your thing, at least from a full production standpoint. Because if you're the one who's doing the main editing and the bulk of the editing, most likely you just have to come with the understanding that you're going to be spending a lot of time of the editing. But some people are naturally great host talents, and so they what they sometimes usually do is go find an outside producer or a friend who would be willing to produce, and then also hire an outside editor, or give it to someone else to edit. So there's always that possibility as well. But I think if you're someone who's going to be the sole owner of a show and end to end all across 360, um, give yourself 3 episodes. And I gave myself 3 episodes, and I think after that, I kind of said to myself like, oh, this is something I really enjoy doing. And then now we're here at like almost 40 plus episodes. It's great. I want to say too, I don't know about you, and I want to ask you this, but the best part of podcasting actually so far for me has been connecting with other podcasters like yourself. And, I had a call with Soda Asian Baking, and I know that's not a podcast, but Soundtrack Your Life, and so many different podcasters out there who understand the struggle, who kind of go through the same thing, right? And share similar wins and all that good stuff. I think it's a natural kinship when you meet another podcaster, because you know that they know what you're kind of going through, especially if you're starting out. And then you just hope for the best for everyone, that they become successful in their show. So I think that's been one of my most redeeming most like redeeming feelings of starting this own podcast.
Sorry to interrupt the podcast, but if this is a podcast that is bigger, this would be the time where we would be selling an ad for either a pillow, a subscription box, or online therapy, but we're not there yet. However, if businesses want us to do an ad for them, we are more than happy to do so. Just reach out to us. In the meantime, this is our time to say that you, the listeners, mean a lot to us. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can do that by listening, commenting, liking, and subscribing to the podcast on all social media platforms, as well as giving us a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We are at What Kind of Asian Pod on Instagram, and just search What Kind of Asian Are You podcast for everything else. And if you have $1 or $2 to spare, buy me a coffee. Links in show notes. Now back to the episode. I would say I agree with your last point completely. Like the connections that you make doing the podcast, entering people that are like minded as you, or just you're interested in. Because I think for me, one of the biggest kind of reason why I do this, other than wanting to provide a platform for other Asian diaspora to share their stories or viewpoints, perspective, and such, is the idea that I want to talk to people that are like-minded like myself and learn from them and like connect with them on a level that I feel I want to at this point in my life. But at the same time, I am more of an introverted person. I feel like as a person as whole, like off this podcast. So me looking for those kind of people to talk to would come by really hard. So, but with this podcast, it forces me to actually look for people that I want to talk to and be like, hey, I want to chat with you about this and this, and it'll be in a podcast. So it feels less burdensome for me to be like initiating a conversation where it's like really random. Let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about deep Asian issues or stories. When
Mm-hmm.
no, if I do that like not through the podcast, it's a little weird unless you build already a constant rapport with them or like
Yeah.
have like a close friendship, if you get what I
Yeah.
mean. So that's why this
Yeah.
podcast has been great for that part. But maybe for me, it's learning how to have those conversations with people around me that I get to know regularly. But at least I enjoy doing the podcast because of that for
Yeah,
now.
totally. Totally. And I also try to look at it like this, and I'm going to get real heady again as well. If I think about like if we think about kind of going forward 20, 30 years, in the future, if there's still a planet. Sorry, I don't mean to bring it down. But basically, if we go like 30 years in the future and we look back to this era of Asian Americans, at least our generation and this generation, of putting out all these content like movies and TV shows and podcasts and articles and media companies, like we have recorded history of what the the group what our people, our community were kind of going through. We have documentation of what our society was kind of battling with, celebrating all this stuff. Because prior to that, we have a lot of recorded history in the history books for sure, and it's not like activism is just this new thing as now, but it's never been so saturated like as it has been today, and social media plays into it a lot of it plays into that a lot as well. And saturated could also have a negative connotation from maybe like a quality standpoint, because when you have just so many people, and it's kind of what happened with YouTube, is that you just have everyone who's just going on YouTube. It's hard to disseminate really high quality, or at least like differentiate yourself from a really high quality YouTuber versus everyone who just kind of wants to jump on that platform because it's so easy. The same thing is with podcasting. Not saying that everyone has to be good, but if you're in the strive or the goal, the intent to become like the best podcaster in the world, it's gonna be hard to come by because there's so many people, and most of the time the issue is discoverability. Sometimes it's just hard to get discovered when there's that many. But from a societal standpoint, again, like you have all these people, we have people like us and all of our podcaster friends and whoever out there, not even just Asian people, but just people in color and everyone who's recording their thoughts and their feelings and their experiences and all that good stuff in a place where we can go back, hopefully, and listen back to say, oh, this is the voice of the generation of that. This is the voice of the generation that was going through at the time. So I think that's like one of the reasons why I really do love podcasting as a medium, but also like just philosophically speaking, I think there's so much value to it with all the great stuff that's coming out.
I love that, and I really love that you that's the mindset that you have, and I think a lot of people probably share the same feelings, and that's why they're doing it as well. At least I feel that for myself as well. Like that, it's important to just document our stories or success or struggles or failures and everything in between. And we're gonna get to specifically what your podcast and all that is about, and like your podcasting journey. But there's one last thing I want to talk about, that is your kind of work with Hate is a Virus. Can you just talk about that? Because I want to talk about like the activism side of that and how you got involved with that
Mhm.
as a whole.
Yeah, my work with Hate is Virus. Hate is Virus is a great team. We're still very much growing. We started out in 2020 as a response with the recent the not recent, but the spike in anti-Asian hate crimes that stemmed pretty much from the COVID-19 virus. And there was this unjust association, as many of us Asian people know, with that's linked between Asian people and the coronavirus. Everyone's just thinking like, oh, if you're Asian, you're automatically having the coronavirus, and a lot of that had to do with the previous administration. But hate is a virus. What we do is basically try to change that whole narrative, and not just relating to coronavirus, but just like unjust stereotypes of Asian people, API folks, and also all people of colors, marginalized communities, just dismantling the systemic systems that uphold racism and oppression and all that stuff. So how we do that, we definitely work with a lot of different organizations who've been doing it, for a long time through grants. And obviously we have a pretty big reach, and so we can amplify a lot of the important messages that we want to bring out, and also amplify messages of our activist partner organizations, and just getting that message out in front of them. How I got involved to it, I had a friend that was part of it, and I was working with Project by Project at the time. And Project by Project was another nonprofit organization that I was working with, and I was with them for the last 4 years. And I was kind of reaching at a point where I was like, I think it's time to move on to other things. And I knew friends had joined Hate is Virus. She reached out to me and asking if I would be willing to join them doing in their operations team, again coming from the operations background, to help build out some of the structures and processes of their team, because it came quick and it was growing really quick. So there was a lot of structure and procedures that needed to be kind of planned out and worked out for the organization to help sustain the organization. So I thought about it. I was also kind of still with Project by Project, but then I kind of came to the decision ultimately to leave for sure. And then I went over to Hate is Virus and joined. But I was also trying to finish out my year with Project by Project. So at one point I was part of two nonprofit organizations, plus working, plus doing Real Asian podcasts. I essentially did not have a life. So I was like working like 9 to 9. But finally, I transitioned out of Project by Project and fully focused on Hate is a Virus. We're doing a lot of great things. We just, had an annual plan of what we plan to do. Can't really announce some of them yet, but we're definitely, growing and trending up. So I'm really excited about that in terms of events, just community, a lot of more community work and getting out there, connecting with folks, educating folks, hopefully. So I started as basically a project manager for the fundraising team and operations team. But then recently, because we want to build a little bit more of our content, do a little bit of different things, a podcast is one of them. They know that I had podcast experience, and I pitched to them about being a producer on the show and helping them with putting out a podcast. So that's kind of where we are right now. So that's all recent. Again, not can't share any more details than that, but we're excited, and we're definitely can't wait to start putting out more content under the Hate is a Virus flag, because I think it's going to be really great conversations, the topics and everything like that going to be fully in line with what we're doing as an organization.
That's awesome, and yeah, everyone make sure to look out for that in the upcoming weeks, months, and such. And we're not gonna be able to talk about what exactly, but I'm sure it'll be great, and I really look forward to knowing more about it. And I just want to touch on like you mentioning that you just somehow got into it because friends and whatnot, and also from your background of being in operations, so you know how to do the operational side of these kind of activism kind of type of work. But like you mentioned earlier, like you were always striving to be like the stable kind of job, stable,
Yeah.
like 9 to 5 or whatever it may be. So what kind of made you feel inclined to get involved in these kind of nonprofits or like get into the
Mm.
activism like space, even though of course it's still using the skills you have from your operational background, but it's still a different kind of thing that you're doing now. It kind of go against, not I shouldn't say go against, but like really different from your mindset of just stable job,
Yeah.
operation management kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's a totally fair question, because you're not the only person that has asked me that. A lot of people, I mean, everyone can do what they want to do in their free time. For me, even though I had a pretty stable job at the time, and I'm kind of going back 4 or 5 years ago when I was thinking about joining Project by Project, because Project by Project was the organization that pretty much got me involved into the whole world of nonprofitism and then community work and learning about Asian American history and all that good stuff. Prior to joining, I think I was at a point in my life where I felt like I just wanted to do more for my community. I I knew that I was Asian, obviously, but I never fully understood or learned what that really meant in the history of the US or in the context of the US, and also just in a societal context. Because I mean, growing up, this is like I get 4 years ago, so I was like 28, 27. And prior to that, I was just full on. I'm American. Like I know I'm Vietnamese. I'm Vietnamese and Chinese. That's my blood. But everything I am culturally and learn is American. That's all I really care about, right? But I think myself, and I learned that other people, and this is what's great about kind of getting involved, is that I learned that I was not the only person. You kind of reach to a point where you go, you know what? I'm grateful for a lot of things. Kind of want to know where that all comes from and why other people have these nuances and subtleties, these subtle Asian traits, if you will, and where does that all come from? And so I learned about project by project because I went to I think it was like a friend of a friend basically asked me to. Oh no, it was my cousin. My second cousin had a friend who was a part of it, and she asked both of us, myself and my cousin, to go to this like info session. And it was the funny thing is that it sounded a lot like a pyramid scheme at first because she was like, "Hey, what are you doing Monday night? You should come out to this venue in SF and learn about this organization." Very vague, you know, and non-descriptive. So I was like, "Is this a pyramid scheme?" Because I've been a part of those before. People say like, "Oh, come invest in this product, and you just need to sell 10,000 more dollars and then you'll become profitable again." So I knew the signs of a pyramid scheme. But but then I pointed that out and she's like, "No, it's not a pyramid scheme. It's like this nonprofit. You only have to pay $20 for the whole year." So I was like, oh, okay, that doesn't seem like much, but come check it out. And the info session was basically, yeah, about the organization. It's an Asian American leadership development group. Uh, Operates a similarly kind of like Hate is a Virus in a sense where it's about connecting with other organizations and fundraising and all that stuff. Um, and as I got more into it, learned more about it, talking with other people who were very much at a similar phase in their life, wanting to be more involved in their community, I just bought into it. And I think I just fell into it. And 4 years go by and I was like, oh wow. And I met so many great people, learned so much. And and got to the point where it's like, okay, this is obviously something that I'm going to continue doing on top of my day job, because I started to find more passion and fulfillment volunteering and working in the nonprofit versus just kind of working the stable job. And for some people, that a stable job, you getting paid, go home, go, do whatever it is you need to do. That might be enough for some people, which is totally fine. I think for me, it wasn't. And I'm the type of person to, I hate being bored and I hate not doing anything. I love being lazy. I don't know if that makes any sense. I love being lazy when I'm allowed to be lazy. Like if I have a couple hours between my next thing, I will do nothing and sit on the couch and like be on my phone or play games or whatever. But if I was lazy, if I had nothing to do for in a week's time, like if I didn't have the podcast, nonprofit work, I would find something for sure. I would definitely find something. And yeah, and that's how I kind of got into it. Yeah, I would have be hard pressed to call myself an activist because I really do think a person who's a true activist is doing so many things, but I would like to call myself like actively involved in the community, and just volunteering and or actively aware of societal issues. That's how I kind of see myself. I know you may think differently, but that's just truly how I feel.
I think what you said, actively involved or like, doing your part, volunteering, and that's good enough already. I mean, not everyone is meant to be what an activist or
Right.
organizer or whatever. Do what you can as long as you feel like fulfilled. You feel like you did your part, then that's good enough. Like, I'm not expecting anyone to be like, "Oh, you must be this or that." I think that
Yeah.
defeats the purpose of like wanting people to be their best selves. So what you're doing is great. I really appreciate what you do, and really always interested in hearing what you're doing with those organizations. Whenever there's updates, I would love to hear it. And now I want to really get back into knowing more about your podcast that you mainly do and like the podcasting journey you have so far. So for the listeners again, what is the podcast? What is it about? And why did you start doing it in the first place?
Yeah, so Real Asian Podcast is a show that talks about the intersection of movies and film. We focus on films that are primarily AAPI or API, basically Asian centric. Doesn't have to be Asian American. It could just be Asian or Asian diaspora movies. And we talk about the film. Usually, the first half of each episode, we kind of just talk about the film, the themes, characters, some of the plot, what we liked about it, what we didn't like, and then we talk about the surroundings of the film, some any interesting stories during the development process, any interesting stories that came out of it in the marketing, some controversies that kind of came out of it. Because nowadays, there's more or less with any kind of huge movie, there's going to be some kind of controversy leading up to it or afterwards. And that's essentially what the show is. It's a roughly 1 hour format, give or take, over under. I usually have at least average 3 hosts on the podcast with me. Sometimes I'll do a one-on-one with one of the co-hosts. Sometimes I'll do it with the guest. Sometimes we'll have a co-host and a guest, or co-host, guest. That's kidding. I'm running out of people. But the format is just basically a discussion format, and we just talk about it. I tend to, if I'm on the pod, I tend to just drive and move things along, go switch topics, and it's interesting. It's an opportunity for me to really talk about my feelings whenever I watch a movie. And really, that's kind of the core start of why I wanted to start the podcast. It was really for me to have a space to have these discussions about some of my favorite AAPI movies. I mean, I love talking about any movie. It doesn't even have to be AAPI, but I felt that there were a ton of movie podcasts out there, not too many that focus primarily just on Asian centric movies and also by Asian people, so maybe there was, but at the time when I was kind of thinking about it, I was like, yeah, there's just not a lot out there. Why don't we start that? And originally it was me, co-host Alan, who's also my cousin, and our friend Brian. We love this show called The Rewatchables by The Ringer, and it's a similar show. And well, our show is similar to theirs because they've been around longer, where they basically do a deep dive and do a discussion on old school movies that you've seen, like old school movies back in the day. And we want to do the same thing, but just for AAPI movies. And that's how the idea came to be. We recorded a few episodes. We did our very first episode, never released it because it was so terrible. I talked about that too before. And then, fast forward today, Renee came on, Baldwin came on, Pragya came on. And now I feel like we've gotten to a place where we're pretty comfortable when we are recording an episode. We want to do as much preparation as we possibly can, like to absolutely see the movies and kind of take notes on it. But nowadays it's like jumping on and it's just like talking with friends. And that's the kind of sentiment that I want to convey to our listeners. Like, it's not a movie review podcast, nor are we like a movie critic, like, or we have movie film background and we're picking apart this movie and saying all these things. But we talk a little bit about the technical aspect of it. But I think for me, I always try to make sure to give off a vibe of the listener just watched this movie with us, or at least saw the movie with us, and we're just sitting around the table and we're just talking about it, with friends. It could be lighthearted, it could be very philosophical, it could be serious, it could be a debate, whatever the case may be. um, and I think I want it to be very approachable for the listener, and not make it seem like, oh, we're gonna get super granular with the cinematography and the lighting. Sometimes we talk about that if it's something to be talked about, but we don't do that with every film.
Going back to like your podcast, so you mentioned like why you wanted to do it. So, but you've been doing it for 3 seasons, coming to the fourth. It's a
Hmm.
lot of work, a lot
Hmm.
of coordination with your co-host in terms of what movies to watch or like
Yeah.
how to run it and all the production things. And it's still really just an independent ran operation with you and your co-host and
Hmm.
people that you work with. What is the reason that makes you keep doing it, or like the why for you?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's a self satisfying feeling of putting a product out there, even even if in a certain episode we don't get that many listeners. or not our average, whatever the case may be, right? Even if it's like one person, I think for me, I try to think of it in a way like, let's just hope that one person enjoys the shit out of this episode. So I want to be able to put in as much work as I possibly can. And through that hard work and process, there's this self gratifying feeling of once it's out there and you listen back to it and I listen back to it and just be, and appreciative of the work and also the time and effort that the co-host put into it. Having a good time and hopefully learning something from it. Hopefully, having the listener learn something from it. That's really why I keep going. Hearing other people and their podcast going helps a lot with the motivation because I don't know if you know this, but I remember like 2020. I think that's when you started you started your podcast 2022, right? I mean 2020 as well, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you know, but there was a drop off of some of the people that I used to talk to. There was a whole bunch of podcasts, and then it just kind of went down a little bit. And then there's like people who have survived the pandemic, if you will, and or like ourselves found that, oh, this is something that I really enjoy doing beyond the pandemic. And so knowing that you are still going, and all the other podcaster friends are going, and also starting, that keeps me going. It's it's a it's a way for me to just be able to voice my opinion about something. And you know what's great is that you control the environment. I'm the editor, so I get to uh, change the narrative of what I'm saying. I'm just kidding, but basically, like we kind of in a way, but it's like you can actually say your opinion and then package it in a way. I'm not fabricating what I'm saying on the episode. I don't want anyone to think that, but I'm presenting it in a way that is hopefully understandable and makes sense to the listener of the message I'm trying to say. Other than that, though, it's been a great self development uh, project. It's been able for me to practice my research skills, critical thinking, speaking, editing, obviously, and just audio editing and producing and creativity and all that stuff, and some technical aspect as well. So all of that is like me feeling like I'm leveling up and like building out my skill tree, if you will, for all the gamers out there. And I'm like, okay, every time there's this new episode or thing I want to do, it's a challenge. And how do I challenge myself? And can I make it better? Even today, like I feel like I learned so much with editing and I'm okay with it, but I listen to like really, really professional podcasts and like the sound of it and the how it's produced. I'm like always thinking, how do I get there and how do I figure it out just from a listener's perspective, but knowing enough on the back end of it that you can kind of pick it apart and be like, oh, how do I replicate and emulate what one of my favorite podcasters are doing? So that's really why I keep going.
That's awesome, and I think your kind of passion for it and what you are trying to do really shows in the episodes that you have released so far, and it's a good fun hearing like people talking about movies that you watch and discussing it because you can feel like, oh, you can get another viewpoint perspective and
Hmm.
get something out of it that you might not have if you didn't listen to other people talk about the same movie that you just watched. And
Yeah.
talking about like the different episodes that you guys released so far, are there a few that is a favorite for you for whatever reason that you think people should check out?
Mm. This is hard. This is like asking to choose my favorite child. All 40 plus of them. My children. No. Um pretty I love all the episodes, but pretty much anytime I get to get the core group together on an episode, it's always fun. And some of the episodes that come to mind is Shang-Chi. That's a big one that we did. And Spirited Away, The Grandmaster, White Tiger, Slumdog Millionaire, Gran Torino, all that stuff. All those movies where I get to sit down with at least two or three of the core group. I just feel I feel really comfortable. We all know kind of which take or which angle we're kind of coming at, and a lot of it is very fun. We have lots of good laughs about that. So that I would say those are my favorite episodes.
That's awesome. And like a few more questions about like your thoughts on like your podcasting journey would be, what has been like the most rewarding or best thing you learned about either yourself or anything as a whole during the podcast? And also, like, what do you hope that listeners can get out of your podcast?
Hmm. Um, I would say what I hope to learn is what I hope to continue doing is exercising my voice and my thoughts and opinions and express my voice in a way also to express the art behind the podcasting. Everything is intentional in terms of it, putting everything together, the music, ad placement, all that stuff. I really take time to make sure it's something that there's a rhythm to it. There's some kind of musicality to each episode, even though it's a discussion and debate episode. Some of those things I try to infuse and continue trying to learn. But yeah, and just trying to continue pushing towards that. That I find a lot of satisfaction doing all those things. um and I also love how it's like plenty of content to do because there's so many movies out there, and that's the probably the safety net that I have, is that we're a movie podcast, and you think about all the movies that are out there. I mean, the amount of options are endless. So it's just a matter of putting it together and watching it and having a discussion about it. So there's no real need for me to be like, oh, what are we going to talk about this week, or what are we going to do an episode on? Literally, we have this exhaustive episode list, this movie bank with all the movies that we want to talk about, old and new, and coming out, and it's endless. It's huge. Really, the only limiting factor for us is just our day jobs and our time and commitment to it and our scheduling. So I think that's really great, especially nowadays. I say this all the time, but I believe we're in the golden age of Asian American films, and with that, I want to be able to go along and provide a space and have an opportunity to talk about those films, both good ones and bad ones. I think the key thing about my show too is that it's very open to all ideas and perspectives. We've had disagreements on the show and each on some episodes where I liked a movie and the other co-host didn't like the movie, and we just kind of debated and argued over it, but that's okay. Like, we've had very serious conversations of reasons why a movie is very harmful, and then also a movie shouldn't be taken that seriously. All of that is fair game. I don't edit those out. I never tell any of my co-hosts, hey, don't say that, or careful what you say. I always tell them, we've had instances early on where it's like, hey, is it okay if I say this, or I hope that's okay. And I'm always like, yes, don't have to agree with me, don't have to agree with anyone. If you have a stance and you have an opinion, like, stick to it. Obviously provide reasoning, but everyone is open to is entitled to their opinion, and that is the point of my show. um, because we don't always talk about quote unquote like AAPI issues. Sometimes it's tapped in, but also we just try to have some levity and fun in that conversation. So it kind of goes all over the place, but that's intentional. So I really want to do that. I guess that basically goes into what I want our listeners to know and learn is, hopefully with each episode, when they listen to the episode, they've learned something new, either about culture or the movie or about us. Sometimes we open up and give a little bit of backstory or experience that we share on the episode, and they learn about that, and hopefully keep an open mind. Totally fine to disagree, totally fine to feel like we suck. Thanks for listening, kind of thing. But yeah, that's one of the things that I hope that the listeners take out of when are listening to our episodes. So check out those episodes. I mean, we love people who share it and send us messages or comments and say, hey, like, hey, that was really fun or interesting, or great episode, and always super appreciative about that. So that really brings joy to me.
That's awesome. And I really like all the things that you said. And I really hope that people listening to this podcast episode will go check out Real Asian Podcast. That's the whole point of me doing this podcast spotlight episode, just so that, it shines light on other podcasts that I think people really should be listening to. And you can listen to it. If you don't like it, that's fine. You can check out other podcasts, but at least check out things at least once, so that you can say at least, oh, I listened to it, but I didn't enjoy it, and that'd be it, rather than like you never tried or you never gave a fair shot to those podcasts. And
Mhm.
again, yeah, make sure to go listen to Real Asian Podcast. Really great stuff. And I've been having a really fun time talking to you about your journey, your background, and everything in between. And thank you so much for your time. I really enjoy our conversation. I really appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you.
All the best in all that you do. And before we really end this episode, where can they find you and your work, all the podcast stuff, and what do you want people to like follow? Like plug away.
Yeah, come find us, Real Asian Podcast, REEL Asian Podcast on Instagram. Follow us and also follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all your podcasting platforms that you could think of. You can find us on there. My personal Instagram, if you want to follow me, my personal Instagram is kazoo.15. There's a long story. There's a whole story about why my handle is what it is. But you can also find it through the Real Asian Podcast. Follow Real Asian Podcast first. If you want to look at nature pictures, then you can follow my Instagram, but totally fine if you don't. And then obviously follow Hate is a Virus. Hate is a Virus is doing amazing work. We're going to continue being out there. Hopefully your listeners already follow Hate is a Virus, but definitely go, if you don't, go find us on Hate is Virus on Instagram. Thank you.
That's perfect. And again, thank you for listening, audience listeners. And tune in next time for another episode of What Kind of Asian Are You podcast. And bye bye.
Peace.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and share the podcast on your social media and rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can find us by just searching What Kind of Asian Are You podcast on Google and at What Kind of Asian Pod on Instagram. For the YouTube listeners, make sure to subscribe, like, comment, and ring the notification bell. Last but not least, buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/whatkindofasian. Thank you again, and make sure to tune in next time for another awesome episode.